You're muted, Danny.
And I'm muted, right? What a great start to a touchy subject we have here today on Field Talk with three other guests, and that I all have the privilege of personally knowing. Here I have Eric, Ben, whose camera is malfunctioning, but we hear his voice, and if you hear his voice, he's just as sexy and visually so. And we got Nathan underneath me. So today's topic is going to be about abortion, and we're just going to kind of raise some questions and then kind of participate or engage with the question, maybe respond to each other a bit. But it's going to be more of a discussion-based format. But we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. One of the first things that, even if you look at the thumbnail, and by the way, I worked really hard on that thumbnail. For someone like me, you know, I started showing everyone. I teach high school, and I was showing all my students, look what I did, look what I did. And they're like, that's not a big deal, but y'all should. But yeah, so we're going to jump into the first thing is that why are four men talking about a women's issue, right? So before we even give our positions, who can even speak on abortion? And we're going to start with Eric, and we're going to come around to me. And then after I give my piece, we might engage. Maybe we want to engage with each other's responses. So Eric, you can go ahead and approach the question.
Yeah. So, and I'll keep it relatively short. I mean, I think anyone can speak on abortion because truth doesn't have a gender. You know, if someone were to tell me, well, you can't speak on abortion because you're not a woman, leaving the social issues aside that have been coming up, whether or not a man can get pregnant and whatnot, despite what our emojis and our phones say, I would just say that truth doesn't have a gender. So if, you know, in other words, if I'm talking to a pro-choice advocate and they say, well, you know, whatever you say isn't valid because you're a male, it's not as if I get my wife to say the same thing I said, they would all of a sudden be convinced. So it's a matter of truth, of looking at propositions, at looking at, you know, what do these things entail? And it doesn't matter what gender, whose lips they come from. Truth is going to be something that remains valid regardless of who's saying it.
All right. Thanks, Eric. You want to go ahead, Ben?
Yeah, so I think that it's okay for anyone to comment on the question of abortion to try to figure out what the right answer is to the problem of abortion. And as long as we're acknowledge the fact of our limitations. So I'm a white male. And so I'm kind of locked out of the phenomenology of what it's like to face the decision to have an abortion, to be in a scenario where I'm pregnant and it's an unwanted pregnancy. What do I do? The phenomenology of that question and that decision is just not something I can understand. I'm also a humanist. So if I were to be talking to a female Catholic, they're going to have a much different perspective than me, just like a progressive feminist is just going to have a different perspective than me. And so as long as it's understood that there's just certain aspects of this question that should inform our judgments on it, I don't think there's anything in principle wrong with anyone commenting or discussing the question of abortion.
All right.
Shall I go? So as a white man, I'm here to talk about abortion because I hate women, and that's yeah. I mean, I agree with basically both what Eric had to say and what you had to say as well. That because I think that the reasons for either position are going to basically, they're going to be good reasons or they're going to be bad reasons, and they should be evaluated as such by anyone independently, right, of who they're coming from. I do think that there are some good reasons which are going to also come from the phenomenology which you spoke about, and that obviously isn't something I have access to. But I do kind of wish that people, I wish that there were more women kind of like sharing those considerations from their experiences of like bearing children or having to, deal with particular forms of, like stigma that they might face around abortions, or maybe like ways that they might be discriminated against for being, or problems that they might face for kind of carrying children in certain, I mean, the US is different from the UK, but issues that they might face, not being able to get like welfare support or maternity leave or whatever it is. And those experiences certainly do bear on the topic, I think. But you know, like Eric said, I think they can kind of come out of a man's mouth or a woman's mouth. But it's obviously women who would be having those experiences rather than men, because men aren't carrying the children. But anyone can speak to the topic on my view. So yeah, that's it from me.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with all of y'all. I mean, it's very. I mean, all I can do is like, what would it be like if something was growing inside me and I didn't want it there, right? Even if it had this label of human, right? How might I engage with that kind of problem? And that's as far as I can really go. But yeah, one of the first criticisms, it wasn't Jay and it was someone else, was like, you should have invited more women to this panel. Well, first of all, I barely know any women. Unfortunately, what you said, Nathan, was that you kind of wish that women, articulate their experience and really engage with the topic. A lot of these conversations are overly dominated by men, and not the abortion. I'm talking about philosophical issues, political issues, or like you see a huge representation of men for some reason. It stretches across all sorts of issues. So I'm just not going to meet as many women that are interested in talking about this than men. I think that might be something to consider. Also, the one woman I do know on YouTube, at least that I'm personal friends with, is pro-life, right? And so that's something I want to bring up, right? I hear this coming from mostly on the people that lean pro-choice, that why is it that women are not, that women should have this kind of voice, that a kind of special voice in the discussion. I don't hear this very come from many pro-life women, which is, so if I had invited my friend Rebecca, who's very, very adamantly pro-life on the channel, on this panel, I wonder how the people that were being critical of me, how they would receive that, right? Because I don't think that's how they would imagine, but I don't think I imagined that's what they wanted, right? But it seems like a kind of a partisan issue to me, but I could be wrong. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd like to offer a speculation, and I obviously say that up front because that's what I'm doing is a little more than speculating. But what I suspect is that from the pro-choice camp, a lot of these objections are expressions of an underlying feminist concern of not being heard and being oppressed by a patriarchal inequality regime. So the idea, I think, you often hear the objection put forward not as, well, who can speak on this and who can't, but who can legislate laws? So, it seems like our legislatures are predominantly men, white men, that are legislating laws that affect only women. And so that these objections point us at that inequality regime in a way that, the feminists are saying, look, we're not being heard. We're being oppressed. And so it's the people that are going to be making this response are going to be from the pro-choice camp. They're not going to be from the pro-life camp. The pro-life camp is not seeing their position as something that is an inequality regime that is affecting just women. They see it as an inequality regime that's affecting the unborn. And so they're just not going to raise it. This isn't the concern. They don't feel unheard in that respect, in the respect that we're discussing right now. They feel unheard in the sense of, no, these unborn children don't have a voice. And so that's why they're not raising this objection. But again, this is speculation on my part.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a really good point. And just to kind of, I guess, so share some thoughts on. So I don't think there has to be any caveats, and maybe that's not the right word, but some of what I've heard from some of the other responses, because I think there's no doubt that as far as physically speaking, this is going to affect a woman far more than it affects a man. But you think about things like, and I'm not trying to open a can of worms here, but if a guy consents to sexual intercourse, but not to pregnancy, and the woman gets pregnant and then has a child, he's going to pay child support. And it wouldn't be a fair argument for him to say, well, look, I consented to sex, but not to being a father, so I shouldn't pay child support. So, I mean, there's a real sense in what it affects a man too. And, if a guy wants a child and is not married and gets a girl pregnant and he's excited about it, but she doesn't want to keep it, he has no say in the matter, legally speaking. So, and there's emotional distress on that end too. So anyways, again, with clearly stating up front that there's no comparison between what the woman's going to have to do carrying that child. There's no comparison with the man, but overall, once the baby's born, there are obviously ramifications, good or bad, or however the person sees it, for a man as well.
Yeah, I guess with respect to what Ben said very briefly, I just feel like if you take the feminist group that he was talking about, their concerns, right? I don't think they would want the legislature to be dominated by conservative women, right? Like, to me, I guess the idea is that they want a specific type of woman with a set of views. Because if I said, okay, well, we can just fine, well, I'm fine with getting rid of all the men and the legislature. Let's just replace them with very pro-life conservative women. They would object, right? So to me, I just think that it's a little bit of we want women that share our views, that represent and that are that should be part of the representing the legislature or whatever.
I think there is a disagreement in beliefs, sort of fundamentally, at the basis here, but I do sort of see that the narrative that'll be put forward by some people, like some of those feminists will be, well, women who adopt those conservative views, like that they actually don't realize they've been indoctrinated into a patriarchal power structure that they could, and it kind of so they still have
they
like
might see them as wolves in sheep's clothing too, that are just
right.
supporting that inequality regime.
Exactly, and so. I mean, whether or not that's actually what's going on, I mean, I think we should just evaluate all of the ideas based on their own merit. But for someone who does believe those things, they at least have a consistent story that they can tell themselves about why they shouldn't accept those women, and why it's still a problem that men are legislating these things.
I see. Did anybody have any closing thoughts on the question before we move on to the next question?
One thing I heard a good friend of mine, Braxton Hunter, said abortion is not a political question; it's a moral question that's been politicized. And I go further to say, it's not a question that only a man or woman can answer. It's not a man's question or a woman issue or male issue solely. It's a moral issue. And like we've been saying, anyone can assess the truth or falsity of a certain claim.
Well, I think it can be both too. Like it's not an either or sort of
right.
thing.
That's why I said solely.
Yeah,
it's not solely one.
That's fair. Then I think we're on the same page then.
All right. With that,
just one last thing on this point, Danny, would just be to say, I think it's worth bearing in mind as well that often when it comes to the rhetoric around who can speak on the issue or what abortion in particular, any political issue, there's different groups that people kind of have insight into. So if you're on Twitter a lot, you're going to see, a very particular kind of discourse coming from a very particular group. If you're in YouTube philosophy circles, you'll see a very different kind of discourse. If you're in Trump Facebook groups or something, maybe you'll see a different kind of discourse. And so I think for people who are considering these things as well, it's worth bearing in mind that what they think people believe might not be actually representative of what the entirety of the US believes about who can speak to a particular issue. It might just be because you're spending a lot of your time on Twitter. And I don't know maybe one of you knows, but if there's any good poll data out, about what people actually think about whether men can speak on abortion or not, because it seems to be this meme, but I think it is just kind of a small epistemic bubble on Twitter that'll be men can't talk about these issues.
I see. Well, with that, we're going to move on to the next question. Before I do, I'm just letting you know, any women out there that want a platform to talk about the issue, they can just email me and we'll do a show with y'all. I'm just kind of I live in my own world. I don't really know very many people on YouTube that are willing to talk about it and are female. I think, like I said, the only one is pro-life. And so, just email me and I'll for sure give you a platform. But we'll move on to the next question. So the next question is just very simple. What is everyone's position on the matter? It seems like we've only hinted at it. So let's start with Eric and go our way around.
Simply put, I think it is, all things being equal, it is immoral to intentionally kill an innocent unborn person, human person. And basically the question of whether or not we can kill something, the first question that has to be answered is what is it? Greg Kokel uses the illustration. If you're a parent, you're washing dishes, and your son or daughter comes behind you, your back's face to them, and they say, "Mom or Dad, can I kill it?" The appropriate response is, "Can you kill what?" It's going to depend on what that it is. Roach, spider, go for it. Animal, pet, no, probably not. Brother, sister, definitely not. So it's going to depend on what we're asking to kill. And Coco goes as far as to say, and for the most part, all things being equal, I would agree that if an unborn human person is not, if the unborn are not human beings, if they're not persons, then no justification is needed. It's no different than cutting your nails or cutting your hair. But if the unborn are human persons, then he says what justification can be given, or no, there could be no justification. So in a nutshell, that's where I would stand.
All right, Ben.
So my view is broadly pro-choice, but I guess what I need to do is kind of define some terms, because really my view is it's complicated. It's a really deep and complex question, and that simple sound bites are probably just not going to be sufficient to satisfactorily answer the question. And so I borrow some terms from Kant, the idea of categorical and conditional. And so I have what's I call a categorically moral and categorically legal pro-choice view. So I mean that morality, as far as the morality component of abortion goes, it's always morally permissible to choose to have an abortion. And on the legal side, I think that it should always be legal to be able to have an abortion. And so using these concepts, I can kind of craft out the other positions that people can take on this, whether it be a categorical pro-life view or a conditional pro-life view or what have you. And so that's where I start. I start with the morality of it and the legality of it. And I think categorically both, it's never morally wrong, and it should always be legal.
From my point of view, I don't really have very strong views on this issue. It's not something that I've really dug into, and broadly the philosophical sort of literature surrounding the abortion issue that I've kind of found it disconnected from the reality of the issue. I mean, in my personal life, I can talk about in the relationships I've been in, the conversations I've had with partners about whether I'd want to have an abortion. I would say no, because I do view it as morally wrong, but I don't know why I view it that way. I don't think I can really provide very good reasons. I think that I just kind of have a prejudice there, basically. It's kind of groundless, according to me. But I do think that women should be legally permitted to get abortions, and I think that they should be able to achieve those safely through proper medical systems, rather than kind of in the past where there's been sort of unsafe or where it's been illegal, or people have had to access abortions through kind of unsafe means. Do I always think it's morally wrong? I don't know. I mean, I think there's some easier cases to answer. Everyone always talks about the ectopic pregnancies, or natural spontaneous abortions that happen a third of the time, or whatever it is. And I tend to think that those are kind of amoral, right? I don't kind of judge someone in those cases. I probably wouldn't judge someone anyway if they told me that they'd have had an abortion. It's more like, I think in my personal relationship, I'd feel like as the father, of a potential child, that I'd feel kind of violated if a partner kind of had an abortion and I wasn't on board with it for whatever reason. But I can also understand if it was completely at the wrong time in my life, and it was very early on in the pregnancy, and I just didn't think we could cope, or we weren't very serious, or whatever, it was a mistake. I might actually considerations personally might favor having an abortion at that point. So I just think it's kind of a difficult, weird kind of weird topic. I tend to think that people who are strongly opinionated either way aren't correct, and I tend not to find their reasons very, very convincing, and I think it's just a really messy one, is my view.
All right. I might be a bad person because I really don't care so much about killing fetuses or the way that the hardship of women. Really, what should be illegal are some of these arguments that I see all around, right? The worst thing when I saw the Roe v. Wade thing is that, oh no, Twitter, right? Oh no, social media is going to go crazy. I'm going to see the same horrible arguments on both sides. People, I mean, it's going to be a lot of talking past each other, and to me, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ride the wave of where this seems to be a topic at hand, but also like maybe we could talk about some of these arguments and evaluate them, because I know that everyone on all sides are probably very sensitive to these talking points, right, on both sides, right? And so, but if for me, the moral question is a bit of an unsubstantive question, ultimately speaking. I think what happens is that a lot of people don't really give their underlying reasons for why they support a position. They give what they heard on YouTube from their pastor, or what they said on CSMBCBB or whatever, right? And they just regurgitate arguments as to get a power trip, or to just simply undermine the other side. I think that that, like, with respect to when I was very adamantly pro-life, when I was a Christian, I realized that when I deconverted, I really didn't give a flip about fetuses, right? I didn't, and more specifically, zygotes and embryos, right? I just don't. When I look at a zygote, when I look at a embryo in especially the first few weeks, I feel nothing. I don't care, right? And I'm really pro-choice when it comes to those sort of things. Now, I think there are some interesting insights even there. What I'm also pretty adamantly against is that there can't be reasons out there where I would, okay, I have to phrase this carefully as to be understood. I think it's definitely false that okay, let me try this one more time. That there's got to be some reasons, for bad reasons, for having an abortion. There's got to be, and I think there's a couple thought experiments that I want to talk about later on that might kind of give insight to what I've just said there. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and answer.
Just to clarify what you said, Benny, you were saying there's got to be bad reasons for having an abortion. That's what.
Yeah, like this idea, and that like everything is. I
think that's a datum.
There's what?
I think that's a datum. I mean, like, women regret having abortion. Like, that's just, there are some women who regret choosing to have an abortion. That's just an empirical fact.
Yeah,
right?
But I'm talking about like reasons where I would stop the abortion. So, for instance, I think that if there were a lot of people aborting their fetus because they didn't want a female, or if we had the technology that we found out they were all had the transgender gene, whatever that is, right? That we had a bunch of religious people just killing their fetuses because they didn't want a transgender child. At that point, I might even consider moving on the legal question. I think that there's something to stop there, in my opinion, right? And that's just an opinion. But so this idea that abortion can be permissible in all cases because it's her body, right? Well, I think there would be cases where I would stop her from killing her fetus. And then those are some examples where I would consider it. And I think that's what I kind of mean.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I don't know if you knew that I had a debate a few years ago with an abortion activist. She was a lawyer and the executive director of Neuro Pro Choice. I don't know if you saw that or not, but she said we need to support a woman's decision even if we disagree with it. And then later on said there needs to be equal rights for everyone, no matter your race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. So I kind of asked her that hypothetical thought experiment. If a religious woman found out she was pregnant, but also found out, the baby was going to be gay or transgender, would you support her decision to abort? Because if yes, then she would be implicitly okay with killing someone because they're gay. If no, then she's going against her own standard to support a woman's decision, even if she's disagreed. She never answered the question, and the moderator kind of forced us to move on. But I'm glad to hear you say that, where there would clearly be some instances where you would say, hey, no, that's not, let's stop that, especially even, going to China or something like that, where they're just killing these unborn children just because of their gender.
I suspect the difficulties people have when faced with these sorts of thought experiments, right? Where uh, you can set it up in like in different conditions. So you could have it about climate change, for example, and you can say, well, if there weren't any there weren't any negative outcomes from driving around like petrol vehicles, would you do it or something? And someone who's really pro climate change because they've got those values is going to have a difficult time saying yes, even though they're thinking I should be committed to that. And I think it just draws out that I think what it puts an emphasis on is that we kind of just have these commitments to certain values, right? When it comes to political our political commitments, we just randomly have these values, or maybe not randomly. I mean, maybe we're trained into them or whatever. But I tend not to think that they have grounds, and I tend to think that they can sometimes be in conflict, right, in certain ways. So it can just be difficult for someone someone like in the example that you just gave there, it can be like, well, yeah, I'm always pro what the woman's choice, but I'm also kind of like anti-religion because of these other political values that I have. And so when it's kind of I'm not sure which of those values to go with when they're placed in conflict. And I do just think we just have these weird values that I don't know why we have them. I don't know that people are going to change their minds about them on the basis of like, thought experiments about violinists and so forth. I don't know why people have them in the first place.
Yeah, I'm somewhat inclined to agree with you there. But one way that I think, Eric, I would respond to the argument, I think how a pro-choice person would respond is that that if they were to stop someone from killing their fetus because on the basis that it's gay or something, I think they could say something like, look, I would stop them, but not because I value like a fetus, but because they're like prejudiced towards homosexuals or something like that. So rather directing their explanation for why they would stop this person is really because they're homophobic and not because fetuses have intrinsic value. But I don't know what you would say to that. That's just kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah. So, I mean, to be fair, it was a question I posed to her because these are her own standards that she put forward. So, I mean, in other words, I'm not asking you guys this question because y'all haven't, claimed that. And if you did, well, the shoe fits, so to speak. But the point is exactly that because, yeah, that wouldn't be a reason to kill anyone. Of course, obviously, we would all agree that we shouldn't destroy, harm, or hurt or kill someone because of their sexual orientation or race or gender and whatnot. But that I like how you responded because that gets to the pro-life position. There's a prejudice against a particular person, and well, there you go. How about let's not have any prejudices against any persons, whether they're just unwanted or deformed, etc. X, Y, and Z. Throw in your favorite pro-life bumper sticker or slogan, whatever. Yeah, it's the prejudice, and that's exactly the point.
I think that what I'm trying to get there with that point, though, is that to them, it's not much of like, suppose we had scientists that were manipulating the genome to where we were weeding out the gay gene. I don't believe in the gay gene, but let's say there is for sake of argument, right? And the gay gene, right? That they would stop that. And whatever motivates them to stop that would be the same motivation in preventing abortions, right? That it's not a matter of whether there's a life inside the woman and this kind of that has intrinsic value. It's that there's this kind of homophobic attitude, and there's an effort to curtail that kind of population, that kind of demographic.
So then wouldn't it be this implicit assumption that regardless of someone's sexual orientation, there's still some type of value to that either demographic or group of people?
Sure. So like in the case of the scientist, they value gay people, right? And they would stop them from, manipulating the genome in a way where you get no gay people. It's just, but I think that the idea it's not that they think that there's a person to be protected right then and there. It's so maybe that same motivation or the same inclination when it comes to abortion, they could have this. Look, I don't really think it's what's in there is valuable in itself. It's that you have this goal to like wipe out or reduce this demographic numbers or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, but there's still an assumption of value for something, be it an actual person or a group of people or however you want to hash it out. But the pro-life position is, yeah, take that same principle about the value and now let's apply it to all unborn persons. And then because in like I said, would they concede it's a person then and there? I know Ben wouldn't. He can speak for himself, and I'm just throwing out there. I'm sure Ben would have something to say on that. But nevertheless, that's where it'd be case by case. But it's the principle of there's value to something, whatever it is that you call it, that's there's value to it, and there shouldn't be any prejudice against it because there's a right to life. And of course, I would argue that it is a human person, but I'll go ahead and let someone else jump in if they want.
Yeah, so I think this is a really great discussion so far. And I want to try to help see if I can pull on some threads. So I see abortion as wrapped up kind of essentially with three really important questions. And so the first question is it always wrong to intentionally kill a prenatal human being? What is the moral status of the prenatal human? And the second question is, what's the moral status of a mother's right to bodily autonomy? How does that relate to whatever the moral status of the fetus is? And the third question is the legal question. Given how we've answered the first two questions, what's the best legal policy moving forward, given those facts? And so if we want to say, look, there's some prenatal human being, and for the sake of argument, it has this gene, the gay gene. And so is that something morally relevant? Is it something, it's going to be wrong to kill this prenatal human being because it has this gene? And I think that's going to be a really tough argument to make. I think the more plausible argument will be to turn to the moral status of the mother's bodily autonomy. I think that what seems to be the thing that we're finding morally objectionable in this case is the mother's intention to kill this prenatal human being because it has that gay gene. And it's this intention, so that when we legislate whatever laws we want those laws to discourage people from having this intention or acting on this intention to prejudicially kill prenatal human beings with this particular gene. I don't know. Maybe that helps flesh things.
It might help to connect with what you're saying. It might help to move to the next question, which is, what does it mean to be human? And so that gets us into the question of, well, we can evaluate the mother's intentions, as you're saying, but it's intentions towards what exactly? And so maybe to connect with what you're saying.
What's the moral status? And
yeah.
So if we're going in order,
we'll go with you. We'll go with you, and then we'll go to we'll go clockwise.
Right. So the way I use it is that human is a biological descriptor, not a moral descriptor. So if I say that some object in the world has the property of being human, what I mean by that claim is that it has certain non-normative properties to it. It might have, some genetic code. It might have some amount of mass. It might be located somewhere in space-time. All of these are non-normative facts. So I don't think so this is Hume's famous distinction between is and ought. So human is an is fact about these sorts of, about a prenatal human, this object. It has human features that are non-normative. And so there's nothing moral follows from that. We have to make a separate judgment. We have to say, okay, what non-moral features of a human are the ones that have moral properties? And I think that's a further question. But I think I'll go ahead and stop there, because right now the question before us is, what is it for something to be human? And so I think all you get is non-normative content out of that biological descriptor.
All right. Did you want to go, Nathan?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, I mean, I take a very anti-essentialist view of language. So I'm going to be against any kind of essentialist characterization of what it means to be human. So I think the word is, highly polysemous. It is used in the context of certain sciences and special sciences where it might have a particular use, right? Where it's kind of defined operationally within that science. So the biological sciences might be one of them, though probably a fancy Latin name instead of human there. But so there's also ordinary senses. There's also legal senses where, again, legal discourse is a very particular kind of discourse that people engage in, and it's going to be used in a different sense there. So in terms of what it means to be human, I mean, I'm not going to give some kind of essentialist definition, but I think the relevant sense here, perhaps in the ordinary sense, I think perhaps does carry some normative content. I'm going to say I think that people who are human were sort of trained to treat in a kind of special way with like moral considerations and so forth, in a way that we sort of wouldn't treat tables and chairs, or maybe we would if they're a person's property right. But it's part of at least the type of linguistic practices that I was trained into to treat persons and humans with kind of special moral considerations and things that aren't, unless
Could you
they're
extend
private.
that to at least some non-human animals to kind of avoid a charge of speciesism?
It sort of depends. It depends what mood you catch me in. You know, like sometimes I'm very sort of like let's include all life, and sometimes I'm kind of like, you know, I don't care. I'm going to be speciesist. But yeah, so it kind of depends for me.
That's fair.
So in the first place, this is like asking what a chair is for me. Again, I don't take there to be like I agree with Nathan. I'm not an essentialist about most things, and if I am, I just mean something like that's its definition or something. So like for me,
the way you use the word, that's what I gave, is because I'm the same way. But like this is how I use the term. This is what I mean by the concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that again, I think it's a kind of a family resemblance thing. But I think what might help is I sometimes distinguish between three categories of humanness. There's like some human life. So like the cells on my cheek cells, there, I think that's human life, right? But I don't think it's like a human being, right? And I get it depends on like, so that's like the broad category, human life. And it really varies in terms of what is valuable and what's not. But as we get more specific, there's human beings, and I'm okay with human beings not being human persons. I think that, for instance, if there were P zombies of myself, basically something like this body, but with no mental life, I think that would be a human being, but not a human person. And the idea of human personhood is that there's this kind of richness, this kind of mental life where they recognize themselves, they know who they are, they kind of take ownership of their experiences and their beliefs, and so there's kind of like the I guess categories, and I think there is a biological component to each of these. So in all cases, you have some kind of biological aspect between human life, human being, and human person. But yeah, that's basically my take on how to answer this question.
Yeah, so I don't think so. There's no surprise when Christian, three non-believers, atheists, I believe, unless someone identifies as agnostic. But no surprise that there's going to be a difference in ontology here. What is Nathan?
It depends on who I'm talking to. Like if I thought you had an issue with atheism, I'd say I'm a new atheist just to annoy you. But I'm actually agnostic. Yeah. But yes, I don't mean to interrupt what you were saying.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so I don't think you can avoid essentialism, and because I would say when we're looking at anything, there's gonna as an amateur philosopher, if you will, you're going to have to give out a set of necessary and sufficient conditions for a thing to obtain. And that being said, I mean, to be human, it's kind of vague. You even alluded to some of that, like, you know, you have cells in your cheek, but you know, it's not a whole human person. So I think at least some necessary conditions would be that, you know, it has a unique genetic code. It's a whole organism. But to go further about the metaphysical implications of this, I would say that every human being is a human person. In fact, I would say that personhood comes ontologically prior to being human. So if it were like a genus-species relation, you would have person-human. Because of course, as a Christian, I would say God's a person, but he's not a human. I am a person, but I'm a human person. He's a divine person. So I don't think there can be quote humans that are not persons. I mean, and there's a lot more I can say there, but I don't want to eat up the time. I'll just kind of wait as issues or questions come up, and I'll address them.
Well, yeah, we Eric and I already debated on the nature of soul and how that relates.
I have a question for Eric.
Yeah, go ahead.
So coming back to what I was saying about human being a biological descriptor. Would you agree that biology can give us the necessary and sufficient conditions for being a human in the sense that we are a member of the species Homo sapien?
So great question. Yeah, I'm fine with that, but I would just want to make a distinction here in that there are. It sounds more like these would be epistemic conditions for identifying something as human, and not necessarily ontological or a priori, so to speak, right? So
Well, so
for example,
your criteria was necessary and sufficient conditions for so, and I thought this was in a definition sense, like we have to give the necessary and sufficient conditions for us to mean human, and it be true that what we're talking about is human in the sense that those necessary and sufficient conditions are met, right?
sure, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so I'm not. This isn't like a gotcha point or anything. So what I'm trying to say is that biology can do like when I use the term human, the family resemblance that Danny hinted at. This kind of comes from Wittgenstein. This idea that like, look, if we're talking about the language game of the biological sciences that are and we have an object in front of us, and we ask, is this human? The biological sciences can give us an answer to that question, true answer to that question. We don't have to go outside of biology into theology or, history or anything like that. The biological sciences have the necessary and sufficient conditions for being human.
Yeah. So let me maybe clarify. And yeah, I agree with that. So the necessary and sufficient, it was in kind of in response to our two friends saying that, they may not take an essentialist position, and where I'm saying, I think at some point, even if we don't know these conditions, there are going to be necessary and sufficient conditions for something, because I hold to an essentialist position when it comes to that. Now, as far as being human, note how earlier I was saying I don't think you can have anything that is human but not a person, and this gets into some metaphysical implications. But in other words, if we're going to
all
like,
humans
example,
are persons, but not all persons are human, is the entailment relationship.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then, of course, the question is, what are the implications of, what does that mean? What does that look like? And at that point, I'm not sure if we can, because I remember in your discussion with, is it Kazor, where you said, we can't answer those kind of questions scientifically. Those are philosophical, metaphysical questions. And I think we would agree on that point. Am I correct?
Well, yeah. So what I'm going to want to say is that, look, the biological sciences can't settle the question of whether or not something has something like a right to life. The right to life is not a biological property. It's an ethical property. It's just not one of the properties that's studied by the biological sciences. The biological sciences can't give us the necessary and sufficient conditions for a right to life. That's something we will have to appeal to substantive ethical claims. Ethics is where we're going to get the necessary and sufficient conditions for a right to life. And so this is just Hume's is ought. So the is being the biological sciences and the ought being ethics.
Yeah, so let's try to get into let's see if we can apply this as best as we can. Everyone agrees, despite our metaphysics, everyone agrees that everyone talking right now or that's talk is a human, right? So we share some concept, right? But the point is that there are going to be people that are going to sort of, their concept is going to start to really differ as we get to, let's say, zygote embryonic.
Yeah, because so.
And so the question is, I guess I do consider zygotes to be human life. I even could grant that they're human beings in the sense that they're individually distinct, genetically distinct from the mother. And so, yeah, go ahead.
A point of clarity, because I think what Eric wants to say, and Eric, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the term. So he's an essentialist about the concept of human, and so my concept doesn't build anything normative into it. It's strictly agnostic on the normative content. However, I think his concept.
Could you explain that so we're all on the same page, and maybe even for people listening about normative and non-normative?
Yes. So let's use it by way of an example. So a thick normative concept, a concept that has descriptive content, but also normative content built into it, is murder. So it just doesn't make sense to say murder is right. Well, that's because murder has built into it this normative concept of wrongness with it. Same with something like similar claim like cruelty or callousness. It's got value built into it, even though it also has descriptive content. I can describe a murder to you. I can describe a callous person. I can describe a cruel person. But it also has this normative content in it. And so I think Eric's concept of human is is a thick normative concept like murder. This thick normative concept is contrasted with a thin normative concept. A thin normative concept is just like the concept of goodness or better than or rightness or ought. The very little content to them, but they all have this normative feature. Normative meaning that it has this evaluative aspect to it. Something is better than or less than. Something counts in favor or gives us a reason for. Something is good or bad, right or wrong. These are all normative concepts. And I want to say that's not the domain of the natural sciences. Biology does it now. Obviously, our methods of science have normativity built into them, but the results of the biological sciences are themselves not normative things because they're about the causal domain. They're about the causal world. They aren't about abstract reason relations. And so this is how I demarcate the non-normative science from the normative ethics. Is and ought are distinct. They don't overlap. They're very sharp categories.
I think the way that, to simplify his point, like if you take a cow, there's like maybe for you there's the essence of the cow, but the essence of the cow is not going to be the you should eat it property, right? But some people think that humans have this essence. Not only have this essence, but part of the essence is that you should not kill it, or that it has value.
Right. It has this right to life, and such that it would, we should, ought, or must respect it.
And so what I think he's saying is that his concept of human just has all that descriptive stuff. None of the you should not eat, you should not kill. Although it could be true that you should not kill a human, it's not going to be intrinsic to it or essential to the concept or the thing. Or that's how I understood Ben.
So it's going to have features. There's going to be features about humans that are reason giving, meaning they're normative. So these are things like consciousness or rationality or the capacity to suffer. These are all features that humans have that we think are morally relevant features. Our moral judgments will change whether or not they have these features. They're the ones that give us reasons to respond in certain ways. And that's the answer to the essential question of ethics. What ought I do? What do I have most reason to do? Well, what are the reason-giving facts?
Can I ask you there, Ben? Correct me if I'm wrong here. Are you saying that those features you listed, like consciousness and capacity to feel pain, those are normative?
So they are the ones that give us normative reasons. So when I say give us normative reasons, there are normative truths about those things. Those are the things, if some, homeless beggar was asking me for spare change, it's the fact that they're homeless and the fact that they're hungry that gives me the reasons why I should give the change in my pocket to them. They're the ones they're the morally relevant facts. Because again, so my first question is, what is the moral status of the prenatal human? What features do the prenatal human have that are morally relevant? Is it consciousness? Can it feel pain? Does it have rights we should respect? These are all the ethical questions we can then ask about the prenatal. Like, we should all be able to agree on the biology. We should all be able to agree that, prenatal humans are human and are alive and can be killed such that they're dead. These are the non-normative facts we should all be able to agree on. Where we're going to disagree is about what features are morally relevant. And we're also going to disagree on how those morally relevant features, if it even has any, relate to the morally relevant features of a mother. And then even then, we're going to have another question of, well, what are those morally relevant features? How do they relate to society? What laws should we legislate? And so this framework allows you to you build up in these questions.
Eric, I'm going to let you respond to that because it's kind of directed towards you, but I kind of want to ground it into the issue at hand. So where we here would think that there are going to be most sorts of killings, intentional killings that occur are going to be killings you ought not do in at least the United States. But as we go to the level of the womb, right, that's where I think a lot of the panelists here might disagree, right? I don't think there's going to be a fact of the matter. I might have certain stances that I wish other people would have, and we can talk about that. But I'll go ahead and let you respond to Ben, and then maybe you could give us then the question I have for you, Eric, is, are there reasons that we might have for adopting your view that we should protect, I guess, fetal life all throughout its development?
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel there was much to respond to what Ben said. And I don't mean that like in a negative way. Like he didn't say anything worth responding to. In other words, because I feel like at this part we're still kind of.
I'm resolving disagreement. I'm not creating it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So what does it mean? In other words, I think if we got to the next question, because in other words, if we all agree that we should not intentionally kill innocent human persons, well, then we can kind of, sidestep that question, if you will, of why, and then get to, some of the other questions about what you're alluding to. Okay, is it a person or not, or does this apply? And some of the other concerns that Ben was bringing up. So, I'll just leave it at that. I don't know where you want to go with.
Next. Yeah, so we're at the question on. Is that should I care, right? And there's going to be that's a big should I? We are going to have disagreements about
the normative question.
Right. Should I care about zygotes or embryos or fetuses to the point where I should stop someone, whether that be in a legal sense or not, stop someone from.
Is the state justified in coming and pulling a gun on someone and saying, you can't perform this? This is a classic libertarian thought experiment.
Can we soften the question? And I don't mean to make it easier, so to speak, but just in other words, because we'll obviously never be in that situation, right? To do it ourselves. So we're talking about stop, but just if we can broaden the question to say, should people be allowed to take a human person's life?
So there's going to do a lot, and the personhood is going to do a lot too. I think you might mean something very different than what I mean, because in our debate we disagreed on what a person was. I take personhood to be a function of mentality. You do, you take a different view. I don't want to mischaracterize you. So if you could just kind of break down your terms there, and then maybe it might be easier to answer.
Well, yeah. Well, just to clarify, first, in other words, rather than ask, should we stop someone from doing X? Perhaps another question would be, should someone be allowed to do X? In other words, if I know, someone's beating their wife, my next door neighbor's doing that. The question we could ask the question: should I invade in their privacy, break into their home, and stop them from beating their wife? But a separate question is, is it morally permissible for them to beat their wife in the first place? In other words, rather than asking, and maybe you didn't mean it that way, maybe that you just said that off the cuff, but what I heard was, should we stop? When I think the real question should be, is it morally permissible in the first place to do X, Y, or Z? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. You might think that something is morally impermissible, you shouldn't stop it, right? So there is a distinction there, but I guess the legal question has to do with stopping. And then you're asking, so let's address the moral question.
Yeah, right.
Right. The legal question is all about should we stop, and then the moral question is about moral permissibility. So I guess you're saying that let's address the moral issue, and then we could jump to the legal.
Yeah, really, what I'm concerned about is the moral issue first and foremost, because I think you can't. Well, not that you can't, but I think any legislation is going to be a moral stance on any issue. So anything that's legislated is morality, I would say.
That's not true. So, I mean, like we legislate things that people don't think are morally wrong, like, you know, breaking, occasionally speeding or underage drinking. Like someone might drink underage, but it's not clear that they've done something immoral by doing so. But we still legislate whether or not underage drinking can happen. We have penalties for drinking underage, but it's not a moral issue. But I agree to your broader point. I think though that there is a moral component to the law. Those are the three questions I laid out. We look at the moral status of the fetus, the moral status of the mother, and then comes the legal question. How do those moral statuses relate to society as a whole? When is the state justified in coming in and saying, you can't do this. This is a line that you cannot cross. And if you do cross it, we will punish you to disincentivize people from crossing this line.
Well, yeah. So like you're saying, it's the moral component, because even speeding and underage drinking, these are legislations for moral reasons. Is it intrinsically immoral in and of itself, which is what I wasn't necessarily saying, but is it intrinsically moral in and of itself to go past the speed limit? No, but we don't want people to speed for moral reasons. The chances of wrecks increase and things of that nature. So yeah, that there's, like you were saying, I guess we could agree on that language. There's a moral component to anything that's being legislated.
So if we proceed with the question about whether it's morally permissible to ever kill an innocent person, right? The way I'm going to interpret either the word innocent is going to do a lot of work, right? So a person that hasn't wronged me, like is that kind of like a person that has not violated some norm that
they aren't blameworthy, I think is what you want to say.
Yeah, usually I think there are cases where I would stop someone even though they're not blameworthy. I mean, like to take warfare or even sports, right? We stop people all the time. But I guess you're not, I don't know. You see, the problem for me is that I don't really understand this notion of moral outside of I'm against it in a way where I would stop you. Maybe I can understand discourage, right? But I would only discourage someone from doing something if I feel like it's not going to be conducive to my goals or their goals, right? And I guess my goals have to be in line with their goals being accomplished, right? I struggle. Part of this is me talking past each other, or at least I'm not understanding you, what it would mean to say that something is morally impermissible.
Maybe.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you please. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nathan.
I think there is a lot of like linguistic confusion in this area, because we tend to talk about what it's morally permissible to do in terms of what people can and can't do. So we talk about it as if it's a kind of possibility, right? Like you can't do that or you can do that. And so I think in the way that we think about these things, it's sort of confusing. I do tend to agree with what Ben said about disambiguating between the kind of moral case and the legal case, because at least from the kind of like political views that I have, there's a lot of things that I personally sort of think are immoral, for example, around people's like eating habits or their health habits and things like that. But I also think, shouldn't be legislated by the government in certain ways. So I think there are things that should be legal but are immoral, basically. And for me, abortion is one of the things that I think could fit, or like having access to legal medical abortions could be one of the things that fits in that category. So is it ever permissible to murder an innocent human? I don't really think it is, from my point of view. I can every sort of thought experiment, every kind of counterexample that I try to kind of construct depends on me sort of building blameworthiness into the thought experiment. So I think, the person's otherwise innocent, but but by killing them, it saves like all of humanity or something like that. And so in a sense, then there's some kind of blameworthiness that's like built into the weird metaphysics of that world. Like if that person isn't killed, they're responsible in a sense for not having taken them. But maybe there's problems there with the way that I'm thinking. But I tend not to think that that it's ever going to be morally permissible to kill an innocent person. But I do think a lot of the disagreement here is just going to come from what we consider to be a human life or a human person, right?
Or moral permissibility. Because I really take this notion of moral permissibility as me discouraging someone from doing something or stopping them. I don't really
but
know.
in a legal sense, Danny, or do you mean like in a personal sense? Because I would think they're different, right?
And both for me. I mean, I think that for me, what's going to be, I mean, it depends on what he means, but if I'm using this term moral, I'm really talking about what I would stop or what I would discourage, and I might use the state to do that. And so there's going to be like, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use the legal means of stopping you, right? When it comes to these,
you might do that, right? Like that is that's one tool that's at your disposal. But in this case, is this one of those things that you'd want to do that for? So like, suppose you were one of the people that wanted to go around Twitter saying, men can't talk about abortion, right? Like, I think that people who do that are immoral, but I don't want to use the state as a tool to stop them doing that. And the same in the case of abortion, right? I think it's like immoral. I think it can be immoral in a lot of cases when people get abortions, but I don't want to use the state as a tool to stop people doing that.
And when you say that it's immoral, do you mean something like you'd rather that not be the case? Like, what is it that you mean there?
Like I'd say it's wrong. I discourage people from acting that way.
Yeah, and there's a sense of moral that I understand. Is that I would discourage people from going around saying that only a certain demographic.
You would try to argue with them. You would try to change their mind and persuade them to say, no, what you're doing is wrong, and that you are going to be subject to the self-contempt and inner abhorrence of your own consciousness once you realize that this is wrong. Like, if you go and behave this way, you're going to have to be accountable to your own conscience, and this might not work out for you for these reasons. These are reasons to think that what you're doing is wrong, and you should change your mind.
So, Eric, could you go back to, so maybe if you could, I told you what I meant by permissible or impermissible. I was wondering what you meant if you were asking me or the panel, exactly what you mean when you say is killing an innocent person permissible.
Yeah. So this is what happens when you get a lot of people philosophizing, in a room. We start talking about definitions and terms and what do you mean this and that. So if I may answer it this way, if we can start with like a clear case of what I would hope or imagine we would all agree that all things being equal, it would be immoral for someone to torture and kill a 2-year-old toddler. Would we agree with that?
Of course.
But what does that mean, right?
So that it means that we should, ought, or must not torture, what'd you say, 2-year-old toddlers?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that we have decisive reason not to act in those ways.
You see, if I were to use that language, go ahead. I
was going to say, I think we have the same point, but I think Danny and I just mean something slightly different by that. We cash it out in terms of like how we would like have a disposition to behave or act.
Yeah, like if I were to say that kind of thing is wrong, all things being equal, I would say that I am against it, right? I have a stance against it, but I don't think that's what you mean, and that's why I kind of need.
Well, so because it seems like you have almost like a prescriptivist type meta ethics in that. When you say that something is wrong, you're saying, look, this is the command that I myself would give myself and obey myself. I shouldn't kill this person.
Well, I mean,
I'm not saying it in that. Yeah,
so it's not necessarily prescriptivist.
Well, so universal prescriptivism was just a view defended by R.M. Hare, and it's this idea that. So there's also this view in metaethics called emotivism, where the idea is that when we're expressing moral blame, those are expressing feelings of disgust. So this is the non-cognitivist approach. It's the idea that, look, moral judgments don't even function as things that are true or false. They're expressions of how we would behave and how we would act and how we would express ourselves.
Yeah, but that's not my position. So
that's why I said I thought it sounded like that position because it almost seems like you're saying like, look, how can something be wrong unless I'm motivated not to act in that way?
No, so I said I have a stance against it, and stances can be true or false, right? If I have a desire, a commitment, it can be true or false.
So you're at least a cognitivist. So you think that this is meaningful language, but so that the stance towards it, and is this like a subjectivist type thing? Like it's like, hey, your stance is the thing that makes it wrong.
It's not conducive to my goals, or it is conducive to my goals.
Like an egoist, like it's not in my rational self-interest to act in this way.
Well, I don't know about, it depends how you're going to cash out egoism, but it has to do with what I take to be good and what I see as good, right? And that has to do with what I value.
So when you say that, well, like, because obviously it's from your point of view, like you only have your point of view. So of course it's, what things seem like to you, but we're asking a question, is there a matter of fact about this? Is there a truth that is independent of your point of view and my point of view? It's a point of view we share.
I don't know what that would mean exactly, to say that there's a stance independent normative truth, though.
Well, now we're getting into metaethics.
Right. And
I have a metaphysical question. I can't answer that one without going into some deep metaethics.
Yes, because and I'm so glad, Ben. Thanks, Ben. For kind of bringing those up, which is what I was trying to get at, because it seemed a little off to me, and that's why I kind of chuckled when he mentioned the egoist, because it almost seemed like any moral position you're going to take, it's filtered through what would I do or stop or say. It's almost like it revolved around your own actions personally. So it sounds like we're kind of creeping into, and I don't know if everybody agrees on whether or not objective morality is real. I mean, I would, Ben, I don't recall your perspective. I think you as well, but I'm not sure about the other guys.
Yes, I'm a normative realist.
Right.
So I think reasons are real features of the world.
Yeah, objectively. So whether regardless of what I would or would not do, there's going to be a right or wrong to a certain action. And maybe you guys disagree. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm fine with, as long as I can understand what's being said, I can answer the question. For instance, I know this is probably not your position, but if you were to say, do you think it's wrong to kill innocent children? And what you meant by that is that, do you think that it's against God's commands? Well, then I could answer the question, right? Or is it against God's desires? Well, it seems like on your conception of God, it would be against.
Are you a realist? Do you believe in objective morality?
No, I'm an anti-realist.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is where we disagree, is in the metaethics.
Yeah.
But there's no disagreement if one were to say, hey, do you think that this is against the God of the Bible? Then I'm going to say, well, we would agree that it is, right? But then there's going to be a question of whether I should care. Right.
Yeah, but so I'm going to ask my 3 questions, and the first one's does the prenatal human being have this real property of having a right to continued existence? As an anti-realist, you're just saying no. There just aren't any of realist properties like that at all.
I think that this is. I think that this is slightly a rhetorical move, though, because it's like, but basically what you're asking, right, is there's this question which if you asked it without predicating it with the theory, right, Danny would answer it in a very specific way. So, for example, if I was like, Danny, should I smash this baby's head in? He'd be like, no, right, don't do that. But then if I was like, Danny, do I have like, should I, God reason, not smash this baby's head? And he's going to be like, no, because I'm asking him then a question about a theory that he doesn't hold to. And it sounds like I might be asking him the question about whether he should smash this baby's head in or not. But I'm actually asking him a question about whether he agrees to my particular theory or not. So one tier of discourse is like the ordinary sense, and the other tier of discourse is the idling theory that sits behind it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty tracking.
That's great. Yeah.
So when you say, Eric, because I know you're a theist, that is it wrong to kill innocent children? Are you asking me, do you think that it's that it's in conformity with what God commands? Or that might not be your view, but
yeah. So
is that what you're asking?
Or does it depend on a theological fact at all?
Yeah.
So at this point, so I'm not even bringing theology into it at this point. In other words, at this point, I'm saying, let's go back to the example, because I was trying to get a clear example, and then it eventually clarified something, but not what I was looking for clarity for, but still very useful. In other words, if I said it is objectively wrong for us to torture and kill a 2-year-old toddler, Ben, as an atheist, is going to agree with me and say yes, and he's not a theist. So in other words, right now, I'm not pointing to the ontological status of why something is objectively right or wrong. I'm just saying Ben and I, being on opposite ends of that question of theism, would still answer yes, it is objectively wrong. So that's where I'm coming at it from.
Right. So I'm not asking what grounds it ontologically. I'm asking for the meaning. What does it mean to say that there's an objective moral truth, right? Because for me, what a normative truth is going to be is a function of my stances, my desires, right, and what I value myself, right? And so then
can I say this? Maybe then, because so I'm arguing on the basis of like of moral ontology, not a moral epistemology. Like the moral argument, right? It's not, well, what do you mean by morality, or how did you come to know morality? It's whether or not it exists. And of course, I'm going to say you can't have objective morality without God. Ben's going to disagree. But when it comes to specific questions and ethics, at this point, in other words, if we're going to go there, we're going to go into the moral argument basically, and then we won't be necessarily properly talking about abortion.
I'm not asking how do you know what's good. I'm asking what the meaning of good is. And when
right,
you
so,
ask me the question,
so it's moral semantics. But again, my argument is going to be on the ontology. So the reason I was asking about the 2-year-old toddler is because if we agree that's wrong, okay, let's go to 1 year old. Okay, 3 months, and then eventually we're going to get to okay in the womb. And then if there's a difference in our answers, regardless of what we mean by X, Y, or Z, then the question becomes, okay, what's the difference between a child in the womb and a child outside of the womb? You may be familiar with what's called the SLED test, size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. And I would argue that any argument you can give in favor of abortion is going to be able to be applied to a child outside the womb. Then I'm going to argue reductio ad absurdum and say, well, if it doesn't apply to this, you can't apply it inside the womb.
Okay, so yeah, let me engage with that rather than maybe getting in the meta-ethical weeds. So I do value toddlers, right? And I do value infants. I don't value zygotes. And you're asking me, what about a zygote makes it such that you don't value it? And you're saying that whatever property I can provide, well, what if we take that property and we kind of give it to some human being that you take to value? Well, then would it suddenly no longer be valuable? But presumably there is a difference in concept between a zygote and an infant, right? And I'm just going to appeal to that very difference, right?
Right, and I'm not saying there's no difference. I'm saying whatever difference there is not going to be significant to justify killing, murdering, whatever word you want to use, that person, because I'm going to argue it's a human person.
Yeah, I think that there we'd have to explore what you mean by significant. And I mean, for me, it's...
In other words, okay, how about this? A 2-year-old toddler that has brown hair versus a 2-year-old toddler that has blonde, black hair. That's not a significant difference. In other words, we need to treat equal things equally and treat unequal things unequally. If my house is burning down and I have the choice to save my daughter or my dog, I would say I am morally obligated to save my daughter. Why? Because they're not equal. They're both conscious. They're both sentient. They can both feel pain, but there is a moral difference between them, and I cannot treat them as equal. So I guess in another sentence, I could say that human persons are all equally valued, regardless of their stage of development. Oh, you're muted.
God, cut your mind. Yeah, then I just don't think that all human beings are equally valuable. And there are, I mean, it does depend on what you mean by valuable. I mean, if you're talking about, like, I think doctors are more valuable than serial killers. I mean, if I'm choosing between which one to whack, I would whack the serial killer, right? I mean, do you think that a doctor and a serial killer have equal value in the sense that if you're choosing between which one to kill and which one to save?
So what I'm saying is, because now, so in other words, should we respect the human person's life? Do we have a right to take away a human person's life? I'm going to say no, all things being equal.
Yeah, the all things being equal clause makes it complicated. I think you're just asking me.
Well, here's why.
Okay.
Here's why. Like for your example, if someone's trying to murder my family, well, then now you're trying to take my family. It becomes between, where's my moral obligation lie? What to my family, not to some stranger, right? So that's why I say all things being equal. And I'm trying to avoid the unnecessary, complicated. What about this, that, or the other? So all things being equal, a philosopher's way, if you will, of just saying, I'm not thinking about possible exceptions. So if you take two human beings who are both doctors, they're both equal. Now, if they're trying to kill me, I'm going to, defend myself. And it doesn't matter their status, because at this point you're now adding a different moral factor into the equation. So that's why I started with a 2-month-old toddler, 2-year-old toddler. And again, I'm just going to keep going back and find, okay, where does that line draw for us? And what are the differences? And are they significant to justify killing an unborn human person?
Yeah, I don't really, I mean, this justified talk, I think for me, it's almost perceptual, right? There's going to be a point where I no longer perceive value, and I'm not going to be able to account maybe for a particular physical fact. I'm just saying that when I look at a zygote, I don't value it in a way where I would legally protect it or even personally protect it, right? And but when I see maybe a fetus in the 8 months in, right? I look at it and I perceive value, right? In a way where, or in other words, the world sort of just gives me this desire to protect it. And I don't really think it's inferred, right? So the sense of justifying a perception for me, I think is that's kind of where I lose you a little bit.
Well, then it does. Then I mean, then how are you? How would you avoid, this relativism or subjectivism where, well, I would protect this one because I perceive it that way, but I wouldn't protect this one because I just don't perceive it that way. I mean,
well, that's my view. I am a relativist.
Okay, that's okay. So another thing I learned. Yeah, so I mean I guess that makes a really huge difference. I don't know if Ben wants to jump in on and touch on that.
So I think that the meta ethics of it all, we've gone astray. Like if we're disagreeing about the meta ethical views, then something's kind of because there's meta ethics. These are first, second order normative questions, and then there's normative ethics, which is what acts are right and wrong, good or bad. This is where terms like consequentialism and virtue ethics come into play. This is another category. This is applied ethics. This is a question of applied ethics. And so we're going to want to try to appeal to premises that all parties can agree to. And so I think that normative premise is that it's prima facie wrong to kill a person. And so then the question becomes, is a fetus a person? And so again, we come back to if anyone walks away from anything, I hope it's these three questions.
Can I jump in here, Ben?
Yeah, sure.
Because in other words, I agree with you there, right? But then it seemed like, and Danny, please, I mean, you say if I'm off or not. Given you're a relativist, you may disagree with what Ben just said, whereas I would agree because you may say, well, it's wrong if relative to me, I perceive it to be wrong. Because I mean that would be relativism, and at that point, then, in other words, the question I'd rather discuss with you would be whether or not objective morality exists in the first place. Because no matter what we say, at the end of the day, given you're a relativist, it's going to be relative to you.
Yeah, but so you're trading the question of applied ethics for one of meta ethics. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just you're then having a conversation about meta ethics, and you're not having a conversation about the applied ethics.
I think what he's saying is that the meta-ethical question is going to really impact when he asks me something like, are human persons valuable?
And so that's fair. But so come back to the three questions. It's, we ask, what is the moral status of the fetus? And then we ask, okay, what is the moral status of the mother? And then what's the moral status of the state? So we can just see, we can trace with these questions what has to be established at each point. So if we want, we have to say, yes, the fetus has a morally relevant feature. This morally relevant feature outweighs the mother's right to bodily autonomy. And the mother's right to, and this, it also justifies morally the state coming in and regulating it. That's a tough, like, you have to make it at each, you have to answer each point of this to get to the conclusion that you want. And if we're stuck on the meta ethics, if we're talking about meta ethics, we don't even make it the first way down that step.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that regardless of how we answer that, if Danny's a relativist, I mean, there would be no way for us to say Danny should or ought to hold to these as well.
No, but you could appeal to my own goals, though, right? You could appeal to my goals, right? So suppose I say that I really value human beings that have central nervous systems. And then you inform me.
But why would I do that? Remember earlier how you said this may make me sound like a bad person, but I just don't care about this, that, or the other. I would say the same to why would I care what your goals are when for me is this subjectively right or wrong?
Well, because we're trying to answer a question in applied ethics. So the reason why you would, Eric, is because we're trying to find the common values, because we want to answer the question of applied ethics. So we want intersubjective agreement on our values. So yeah, you're saying, like, look, I have this value. I want to know if he's got it. And then you say, do you have this value? And they say, well, yes. What does it mean in the dialectical? Then they just say, oh, well, I don't care that you have that.
In that case, in other words, didn't Eric stipulate that he was trying to persuade Danny, though, in that case? So it's like, if I was trying to persuade you, why would I do the thing that would persuade you? And it's like, well, presumably because you want to persuade.
So if Eric wants to persuade Danny, he would want to appeal to a value that Danny holds, like a value relative to him. And then he would say, okay, and then you would use reason, and you would say, look, here's how abortion is inconsistent with that value. This value and this value, even by your own standards, even by your own relative standards, there's an inconsistency here. That's a way he can convince him.
Well, so let me say this, because, and we might even just be on different pages here, because
Eric, one-on-one. I'm going to give you the last word on this topic, and then we're going to go to the next question because we're running out of time. So if we could give Eric the last word here.
For sure.
Because I think my point is made and your point has been made. Let's give Eric the last word, and then we'll go to the next topic.
Yeah, and I appreciate the clarification. If it were a one-on-one with me and Danny, yeah, I would do that. But as I said earlier, for me, it was that, and that's why I was trying to get some clarification. Do we all agree it's wrong to torture a 2-year-old toddler for fun? And I forget the question Danny asked, but now that we know his position, then it's like, okay, well, if it were one-on-one, yeah, I would take a different approach. But for me, as I mentioned earlier, it's the moral question that I'm interested in. And if Danny doesn't hold, if it's relativism, then sure, I would have to find something like that. But for me, in other words, it would be it's to reiterate what I said earlier, it is more objectively morally wrong to kill an innocent human person, all things being equal. And that's where I stood. And then, that we got to this point. So,
all right. With that, we're going to get more into the nitty gritty of some of the worst arguments for and against abortion. So we can do a little round circle thing. I guess I will begin. So I'm really not, I probably have misunderstood it. So one of y'all could correct me. I'm not a big fan of the bodily autonomy, my body, my choice. And that's probably because people do a very poor job of articulating what they mean there. And I just maybe haven't been that charitable. I don't know what it is, but I do get kind of triggered when I see that, because I feel like it's not really engaging the right way with someone that disagrees with them. Because, but I maybe one of y'all could give me the strong version of the bodily autonomy argument. I just don't buy it. But maybe we could go down to the right. So Nathan, and then we'll go to Eric last.
I feel like I want to take the cheap shots at this point and just agree with you that, oftentimes in these discussions, when I hear people kind of parroting out lines to do with, and maybe this is, a problem with me and I should listen to stronger versions or people who make the case better. But often I do hear just a lot of rhetoric about like my body, my choice. Right. And I can sort of be like, well, yeah, like I agree with you in most cases, but when there's this kind of ambiguous case about potentially another life form, which I'm not sure about the status of its rights and so forth. So I'm not sure if I'm just okay with you doing whatever the hell you want, right? Just because you want to. Just in the same way, if you own like a dog or a cat or something, I'm not okay with you just like feeding it bad food or stomping on it or something. Like I'm gonna resist that in certain ways. So yeah, and I tend to find that I tend to find the reasons given sort of just do bottom out at that point. But maybe this is one of those experiential things, right? Where because I don't have to carry a baby to term, and so my existence as a person isn't going to be influenced by this kind of like biological capacity that I have or didn't opt in for or anything. I just don't. I don't share the same concern that I will get pregnant, and like when I didn't want to have it, and it would affect my life in certain ways. So this could be one of those cases, and I'm just not being empathetic enough.
Before we move on to Ben, just thanks Max for the donation. Appreciate it. Remember, you can donate or join and subscribe, become a member. You should look into the tiers. Oh wait, okay. Go. I think Eric, are you still here? Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to Ben.
Yeah. So hopefully I can help try to steelman this argument a little bit. And so the idea goes, it's just a simple syllogism. The first premise being a right to life does not entail a right to use another's body to continue living. And the second premise is that a human fetus must use the birthing person's body to continue living. So what follows from this is that even if we suppose a human fetus has a right to life, that does not entail a right to use the birthing person's body to continue living. And so we can't disagree with the second premise. Human fetus must use the birthing person's body to continue living. That's just a fact of biology. And so what about the first premise? A right to life does not entail a right to use another person's body to continue living. This is where something like Judith Jarvis Thompson's violinist thought experiment is going to come in. But she also has two other interesting thought experiments, one called the expanding child and another called people seeds. And so what these thought experiments are meant to show is that a right to life does not entail a right to use another person's body to continue living. And so that's the purpose of arguments like the violinist, is to support that premise. And so it's the only premise that's controversial. We can't plausibly deny the second premise. And the conjunction of those two premises is that even if we resolve our meta-ethical disagreements and we agree that a human fetus has a right to life, that doesn't entail a right to use a birthing person's body to continue living. That's the argument, I think, in its strongest form.
Thanks for that, Ben. Eric?
Yeah. So I think the question. I think it was Stephanie. I forget her last name. I heard her say. A question in this is also, well, what are the moral obligations of parents, and when does parenthood begin? And I would say that parents have more obligations to care for their children. If I don't feed my kids, I'll be arrested for negligence, and I don't see how the kid being outside or inside the womb makes that different. Even when a baby's born, it's going to still rely on it doesn't have this autonomy, especially if the mother's breastfeeding. You know, they're in a poor country. All she can do is breastfeed. It's going to rely on the mother's body. So, as I said earlier, if that's going to be the standard, well, then it could be applied outside the womb as well. And then you bite the bullet, and then now you're talking about infanticide. So, I'll just reiterate this: any argument in favor of abortion, any argument for abortion, I would say, can be applied outside the womb. And if we're going to reject it outside the womb, we should reject it for inside the womb as well. As far as, the worst arguments, y'all are going to get me in trouble here. So give me a second to unpack. If I'm talking to, as I am now, non-believers, I'm not going to point to the Bible because you guys don't believe the Bible's the word of God. And then give me a few more seconds to say to those Christians listening who just, punch their computer. You look at Paul, where he appeals to other things like pagan philosophers and poets to make his case. So, I would say something is, now I'm talking to my Christian audience, something is true, not simply because the Bible says so, but rather the Bible says something because it is true. So there's, one comes before the other. Truth existed prior to the Bible being written. So when I'm talking to non-believers, I'm not going to appeal to the Bible as an argument, against abortion. Thanks.
All right. And Eric, you kind of gave a good argument. You with the question was the worst arguments, but you gave your good and your bad argument, right? So maybe with that we can just
just before prior to moving on, I think there are some general considerations about arguments here, at least that I hold to. I mean, not everyone shares these sort of concerns, but it's basically going to be that as long as someone's providing a deductive argument, they're just essentially providing a set of claims which entails some proposition, right? And so it just might be the case that if you're committed to the opposite of the entailment of that derivation, then you've got an inconsistent set, supposing that you sign up to all the premises that are offered in the argument. Now, for someone who already agrees with the conclusion, right, then that might just be a description of the kind of set of beliefs that they hold, or some subset of the beliefs that they hold. For someone who disagrees with the conclusion, either if they're reflective, they've probably excised the kind of premises that cause a kind of problem, some kind of contradiction or whatever in their belief system. They're also within their right, supposing they accept the argument, to say, but I also deny the conclusion for these independent reasons, and so I'm going to withhold, judgment about that argument. And then they might just have some work to do to go away and figure out if they do, rational belief revision, if they're going to reject one of the premises, if they're just going to continue to suspend judgment, which is fine. So I tend to be sort of pessimistic. This is going to apply to philosophy of religion. It's also going to apply in these abortion cases to the idea that there are going to be these sort of arguments that on topics where there's widespread peer disagreement that are just going to persuade people, or ought to persuade, all kind of rational people to change their mind in favor of one particular side of the debate.
Yeah, let me bounce off that. I'm in agreement. I think that the best arguments for either pro-choice or pro-life are going to be you understanding what the other person values, what their commitments are, and a lot of cases, what ends up happening with these political issues or these disputes, these moral disputes, is that people argue about the descriptions of the non-normative, as Ben had earlier said, facts. So for instance, if I say that I really, I'm against causing pain. Well, if Eric points out that a fetus can experience pain, right, there he might persuade me. But notice that he's giving me something, he's appealing to my values, and he's actually informing me of descriptive facts, right, that fetuses have a neurological system and have these behaviors that might suggest that they're in a state of pain when you do blah, 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 right? And to me, that's going to be the best sort of arguments. This is why I think Eric thinks that giving the Bible argument to atheists is no good, right? That you don't go to an atheist and say, because the Bible said so, it's wrong, because in our background commitments don't involve
Well, I was going to make a low-hanging jab there, but you do go to them and give them the premises of the Kalam, which is, but yeah.
Yeah, you have to start all over. You have to start way back there, I guess. But that's part of the reason why I think Eric would think it's not a good argument. It's because it's not in our background knowledge and atheist background beliefs or commitments that the Bible is true. So really, I think, and this is kind of dodging the question, but the best arguments are going to be arguments that are appealing to the person that you're disagreeing with values and informing of the descriptive facts usually.
So what if I were to say, because that's a fair point to make, that every human person has a right to life? Would you agree with that? Would that be part of your value system?
Well, I think that if what you're saying is that there's this other person in this room that I don't know anything about, but all I know is that they're a human being, right? Then would I protect the right, protect their life, all things being equal, if we're bracketing a lot of, exceptions and stuff, then yeah, I think I do value human beings, just myself, like just simpliciter. And that has, but I mean, you have to, if you add on stuff, then I might change my mind very quick.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I would start. We had to have a starting point, and then that's where I would say, well, the unborn is a human person, and then you factor in Ben's argument that he just gave, and then his reply, and then my reply that, well, it's not a sufficient reason, and that there's moral obligations for parents, and that that's going to play outside the womb as well, then infanticide and yada yada. But yeah, now that we're at the end, we're finally.
I would say that not all of the unborn is going to be a human person, on my view, but that's because we're talking past each other when you're saying person. I don't think zygotes. We already discussed this, so I don't mean to repeat myself, but mental life for me is very important. I don't think zygotes have a mental life, right?
I don't think Danny's denying that you have like a coherent set of beliefs yourself about the topic, but he's just saying he doesn't sign up to all the things that would commit him to this particular belief.
Sure, and this is kind of where I was wanting to get at, and we're finally here, but we're probably coming to a close. Is the aspect of this is where we're going to come down to, or how do we define a human person? And I would define it in a set of ultimate capacities, not actualized capacities. Because if you're going to point to consciousness, well, then you get to people in like a reversible coma or under anesthesia who are not conscious. But I don't think you would say, well, we can kill them because they're not conscious, if that's going to be a necessary, sufficient reason. Well, when you take those out, then if you're going to be consistent on your view, you should be able to kill something
if I
because it's no
knew
longer.
they had no mental life, I would not value them at all.
So
But
someone in
now-
anesthesia.
Yeah, so if I knew that they would never have a mental life, there's no potential for mental life, then I would, all things being equal, I wouldn't really care about it. But if another family member knows that, but nonetheless they value the human being, the non-person, the body, then I would care, right? Because it's going to harm another family member's feelings or whatever. I value the family member. So, but if no one cared about pea zombies, I don't give a damn about pea zombies, all things being equal, right? I really value the mental life more than anything
Right.
else. And if it, yeah, I don't mean to repeat myself.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, but that's my point, though, right? We're talking about you, not other family members. So if you value mental life, and if you don't care if something doesn't have a mental life, but then you added on that caveat of will never have a mental life. Okay, so then would that imply that if something had the potential to have a mental life, or if someone was under anesthesia or in a reversible coma, if someone was in a coma, no mental life, which I would say, according to what you've told me, would constitute that they are not a person, but you knew in 3 days they would come out of this coma, would you say it's permissible to kill them within those 3 days prior to them coming out of that coma?
All right. So now I think for me, what's going to matter is if they're going to have all their memories. Is it going to be the same person? Okay. So if I found out a different person was going to occupy that body in 5 years, and I treat it, I'm fine with ending the life, right?
Well, let's stick to the 3 days. I go in a coma in 3 days. I go in a coma, and in 3 days I'm going to come out. You don't know if I'm going to have the same memories. And let's say I'm your brother. I don't know. And you don't have the money to keep me on the life support for those 3 days. Do you think it's morally permissible to pull the plug?
I would not pull the plug.
Why?
Well, I value mental life. If I know that it's going to be there in 3 days, then I'm going to find myself valuing the preservation of that body.
So what about in a few months, like when the unborn becomes?
And you're saying it's a chance that it's going to be my brother coming back?
No. In other words, now I want to apply it to abortion. At what stage does the unborn have a mental life?
But in your original thought experiment, I thought your original thought experiment is that this body was my brother, and there's a chance that my brother's coming back in a few months, right?
That we know for sure he's coming back.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because I love my brother.
Okay, right. So now let's say you're old enough, and your mother's pregnant, and you're old enough to know this is your brother in the womb, not conscious yet, but in the same amount of time that your hypothetical brother would have come out of the coma is the same amount of time needed for this unborn brother of yours to be conscious. Then I would assume that
difference between those two cases, because in the original case, I did already know my brother, and remember, by knowing my brother, I meant I know his identitarian commitments, his memories, his relationship to me. But in the fetus case, I don't know who my brother is. I just know that there will be a brother given we allow for the development of the fetus, and I don't think that's as valuable.
Well, I would say it is your brother, whether you know him or not. It is your brother. Biologically,
well, remember, but I cast out brother in terms of mentality, right? It's not my brother. The zygote is not my brother, given that I don't perceive any mental states.
But, well, now that just seems, and I'll let someone else talk because I don't want to take all the time, but that seems like a really arbitrary way to define what a brother is, and it's not the standard way of how anyone that I know of would define.
Well, look, I actually have a brother. My brother has a relationship with me, and that can only make sense if he has memories, beliefs, and desires with respect to myself, right?
So
I don't know. Go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah, no, yeah.
So you're telling me if tomorrow your mom says, "Hey, by the way, I've never told you this, but you have a brother in Mexico," you would say, "No, I don't, because I don't know who he is."
Yeah, but then in that sense, they're equivocating on. It's a different sense of brother. It's like I'm biologically related to this person.
That's what a brother is.
Yeah, I don't care.
If I can interject at this point, though, if you see what's happening, when the sort of criticism I raised about arguments is sort of on display in the dialogue here. So there was sort of like an original argument, right? And one of the premises was kind of disputed by Danny about whether or not a fetus is going to be considered a human life, right, in a particular case. And then there was like a further argument that was provided about that case, which was to do with, you know, like the potential for the cognitive capacities to return and so forth. And then there was a contention about a premise in that derivation, which was about like what a brother is. So then there's like a further argument provided about, you know, like what a brother is. And the problem is that I think we just kind of get into at what point do we say there's just genuine disagreement, right? So both of you can be consistent in your beliefs. Danny isn't committed to all the premises that mean that he's got some contradiction in his belief system here, where he thinks, you know, abortion is permissible and not permissible. Do we just continue to provide like derivations infinitely?
Well, I think Eric is trying to show an inconsistency in my web of beliefs, right? That's what he's trying to do. I don't even know if he's trying to argue for anything. He's just saying, let me see what you believe, and I'm going to show you that you might be committed to what I believe as well, right? Is that what's going on, Eric? Yeah, and so the idea is that when I said my brother, I actually have a brother. His name is Kent, right? I associate my brother with a set of mental beliefs. But if I found out that I have some other brother out there that I've never met, that's going to be a brother in just merely in the biological sense, right? Because there's a biological sense of brother too, right? But then there's like, just like with father, right? There's a biological sense of father, and then there's the sociological sense of father, right? After all, you think God is your father, but not in a biological sense. You think that other Christians are your brothers and your sisters, but not in a biological sense, right? There's a sociological aspect that I'm privileging, right, with respect to the coma. And all I'm saying is that I privilege the sociological sense of brother and the relationship that I have between my beliefs, his memories, and all this stuff. And when you just say that, well, you have another brother in the state of whatever, and you've never met him, then that's just a biological sense of brother. And I really don't value that as much as I do value my actual brother and the sociological aspect of that.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, you used the word brother that I was not familiar and probably don't agree with, and that's where the disagreement lied. It was just maybe a poor choice of analogy, because it almost seems, and I don't want to accuse you of anything, but from my perspective, it almost seems as if you're either being ad hoc, or maybe, you know, backpedaling, which I don't think you are, or you maybe just genuinely had that sense in mind when I didn't. And like I said, it's a very odd sense of the word brother in the way I was thinking.
Do you think it's a very odd sense
move on.
of the word father when you refer to God as your father?
No, because there's a specific type of meaning in that within Christianity. And given that you're not a Christian and we're talking about generalities and biology, I figure that when I use the word brother talking about abortion, we would be talking about.
I'm not a Christian. I understand what you're talking about when you say God is your father, that there's a dynamic between you and God, that you serve him and he's the domineering, he issues the commands. There's a kind of relationship that I understand even as a non-Christian. And I'm just saying that that's not a weird sense of father.
No,
right?
In other words, given the context of this discussion, I just assumed we would use the word brother in the biological sense.
But they're adopted children.
And sure, my fault. Sure, I think that's fine. I'm just telling you where my train of thought was at.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. Now I understand. I'm just saying that even if I found out tomorrow that my brother is not biologically related to me, because I don't look like him actually. I actually don't look like this guy. If I could show you a picture of my brother, y'all would be surprised. But if I found out he wasn't biologically related to me, I wouldn't care. He's still my brother. All right, with that, we're getting around to 2 hours. Ben's been quiet for a bit. I didn't know if you had any. How about we do this? Ben, you can start your last remarks, and then we'll go to Nathan, Eric, and then I'll end the show there. There's a lot to talk about, but we can only do so much in this amount of time. Thanks for coming on. We'll go ahead and start with you, Ben.
Yeah, so I guess I want to enclose it because I know we kind of got pretty far, I feel, away from really kind of the meat of the issue, because at the end of the day, this is a political question. Like this is a question about how we want, what kind of society do we want to live in. And so I think that reason has a really long reach, the long reach of reason, that it's having discussions like this that, yeah, Nathan's got a point, and that people don't change their mind in real time with arguments, but arguments have a much broader effect as through history. I'm a Hegelian. I'm gonna bring up Hegel at least once in every conversation. And so I see, these sorts of things as having, ripple effects into, helping us collectively as a species come closer to truth and to make progress in ethical and political domains. And so I think that that's why we should care about the strongest arguments on both sides of this, because it's also a political weapon. Political parties certainly capitalize on, the emotional states of people, in all sorts of ways. And so, like, I think people should just care about wanting to get at the truth of this question for the right reasons so that we can build a just society the right way together.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah. I guess I don't really think I've changed my views through the course of this conversation much, but hopefully it's been useful for people listening in to hear, a few kind of different positions on display. I mean, my view is still broadly that essentially all of this kind of just bottoms out in groundless, weird things that we do, right, as part of our linguistic practices surrounding morality and politics and so forth. Sorry. So yeah, I'm not really sure why people do have the values that they have. I suppose it's going to be some combination of maybe psychological facts about them and their affective states and the way that they were raised. I don't think that there is actually a fact of the matter, as it were, about whether abortion is right or wrong. I tend to be morally against it on a private basis still, but I think that legally, society should permit safe medical abortions for women, because that way I think more people flourish, even if I think on an individual basis it's wrong. So that's still my position, but I guess my mind could be changed by things. I don't know what things, but probably like you'd have to change my values somehow. Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah. So, to reiterate what I said earlier about what my friend Braxton Hunter says, that abortion is not a political issue; it's a moral issue that has been politicized. Because for me, it's at its core a moral issue. There's a right and wrong answer to it, and and I'll point this out by saying, like, if we were to talk about slavery, we're not going to say, well, slavery is a political issue. Let's talk about, let's have safe legal slavery. And if we had better safe regulations for slavery, I would stand up and say, no, it's just immoral. There's no safe or unsafe to it. It's immoral. Don't do it. And for me, that's where the abortion question lies. And then given that there's a diverse sets of views here, it's part of it is, we're trying to say something to where we could all agree, but then at the same point, there's just fundamentally areas where we don't all agree. So when I'm talking to Danny, that may not apply to Ben. And when I'm talking to Ben, it's not going to apply to Danny. And then, then Nathan's going to come in and clarify where we're all, just getting it wrong here. And, it was interesting, but yeah, because of the diversity of views, especially fundamentally with the question of morality in itself, where you're a relativist, and you're an atheist. Ben's an atheist, but he will agree with me with objective morality. Yet I'm a theist. So yeah, I mean, there's so many points to touch on, and I mean, we were able to point out some issues, but definitely, I mean, I don't even think we scratched the surface. We just like tapped it a little bit.
Yeah, we never scratch the surface. We never go more than scratching the surface with these kind of topics with just 2 hours. But maybe we could talk about morality or host something like that. But thanks to my guest.
Meta-ethics.
Yeah, meta-ethics. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on. Let me be a sellout for a second. If y'all have seen, look at Deepak's name, everyone in the chat. Okay, he has a cute little badge, and if you want that badge, you can get that badge for 99 cents a month. You see, and if you are a member longer than 6 months, you get the rainbow one. So just keep in mind the rainbow one, but it's less than $12 a year, guys. So just to get the cute little badges.
Can you pop up Deepak's name, Danny? I want to see the.
Oh yeah, let me pop up Deepak. Okay, so can I do this? Oh no, I hit that button.
Can you do it in the StreamYard chat or? Have you got it on the thingy?
Okay, I'm gonna end this poll. Okay, where's Deepak? Okay, you see, okay, wait, guys, I might be messing this up. I can pop up the chat. I promise. I'm not a boomer. Okay, look, pop out chat. Okay, so here we go. So you can see Deepak, this little P
Oh,
there. Now
wow.
it looks better if
I'm jealous.
you see, and it can be rainbow. It can be rainbow. Okay, so there's that very important detail. But thanks for everyone watching. We had a good stream. We're gonna go ahead and end it there. Y'all take care. Have a great, what is it, Thursday? It's almost Friday, so there's that. I'll see y'all later.